Ukrainian forces are battling Russian invaders around nearly all of the country's perimeter after Moscow mounted a mass assault by land, sea and air in the biggest attack on a European state since World War II. Civilians have piled into trains and cars to flee, with Ukrainian refugees already starting to arrive in neighbouring Central European nations. NATO and European leaders have rushed to respond with strong financial sanctions against Russia and moves to strengthen their own borders. Ukraine's leadership said at least 40 people had been killed in the fighting as the country's forces continue to try to prevent a Russian takeover. Protests across the world. Demonstrators shout slogans during a protest outside the Russian consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. AP, Francisco Seco. Protests against Russia's invasion of Ukraine have been held in countries across the world, including the UK, France, Spain, Germany, Turkey, the Netherlands, Montenegro, Cyprus, Japan, Norway, Sweden, Italy and others. Demonstrators gathered outside Russian embassies and other landmark spots waving Ukrainian flags. Many of the demonstrators, including Ukrainian expats, chanted slogans in support of Ukraine and held banners saying Ukraine will resist and stop Putin, stop war. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 1 minute 52 seconds 1 minute and 52 seconds Russians across the country protest Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Protests were also held in 51 Russian cities on Thursday, the OVD Info protest monitor said. Russian police detained at least 1,400 people as protesters chanted "No to War" and held placards with anti-war and anti-Putin messages. The country's investigative committee issued a statement warning protesters of negative legal consequences of these actions, which include prosecution and up to criminal liability. It should be remembered that holding a criminal record holds negative consequences and leaves a mark on the person's future, the statement said. Demonstrators gather at Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. Christian Mang. Where are Russian troops? Russia has launched a wide-ranging attack on Ukraine, hitting cities and bases with persistent and prolonged air strikes and shelling. Kiev reported columns of troops pouring across the borders with Russia and Belarus stretching from the north and east, and landing on the coasts from the Black Sea in the southwest and Azov Sea in the southeast. Fierce fighting was taking place in the regions of Sumy and Kharkiv in the northeast, Kherson and Odessa in the south, and at a military airport near the capital Kiev, an advisor to the Ukrainian presidential office said. M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 5 minutes 24 seconds 5M. Ukraine sustained more than 200 attacks overnight as the invasion comes from the north, east and south. Source, AP. An advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine has lost control over the decommissioned Chernobyl nuclear plant, north of Kiev, near the Belarus border, after a fierce battle. Regional officials said Ukrainian authorities had lost control of some territory in the Kherson region near Russian-occupied Crimea. Ukrainian military authorities on Thursday said 20 Russian helicopters and Mi-8 aircraft had dispatched paratroopers at Hostomel Airport in the Kiev region, where forces from both sides were fighting for control. Known Russian incursions in Ukraine. ABC News. Ukrainians told to stay indoors. Martial law has been declared across the country and a curfew has been announced in the country's capital. Kiev's Mayor Vitaly Klitschko has asked citizens to remain indoors between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. It is necessary for the safety of the capital's residents amid military aggression and with martial law in force, Mr. Klitschko said. Public transport will not be running during those hours, but metro stations will remain open as air raid shelters if they are needed. Long lines of people at ATMs and banks have been seen across Ukraine. Pavlo Palamarchuk. People have been lining up at ATMs and petrol stations across the country as some prepare to flee the country, but for many, they have no option but to stay put. G7 condemns Russia, further sanctions to come. The Group of Seven, G7, industrialized nations strongly condemned on Thursday Russia's invasion of Ukraine and said they would bring forward severe and coordinated economic and financial sanctions against Moscow. This crisis is a serious threat to the rules-based international order, with ramifications well beyond Europe, the G7 leaders said in a joint statement, adding Mr. Putin had reintroduced war to the European continent. He has put himself on the wrong side of history, said the leaders in the statement released by Germany. G7 leaders gathered in a virtual meeting, pledging to bring forward further sanctions against Moscow. Ludovic Marin. The leaders also said they supported consistent and constructive engagement and coordination among major energy producers and consumers towards stable global energy supplies, and were ready to act to address potential disruption. Mr. Biden is set to announce the new measures later today, while British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has unveiled a package of severe sanctions against Russia targeting banks, members of Mr. Putin's closest circle, and the extremely wealthy who enjoy high-rolling London lifestyles. Darkest hours of Europe since World War II. US President Joe Biden called the Russian action an unprovoked and unjustified attack. EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said the bloc would impose a new round of sanctions that would hit Russia's economy severely. Russian shelling continues to inflict damage in Kiev region, Ukraine. Ukrainian State Border Guard Service. EU Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell has described the Russian assault on Ukraine as among the darkest hours of Europe since the Second World War. The assault brought a calamitous end to weeks of fruitless diplomatic efforts by Western leaders to avert war. Russia treacherously attacked our state in the morning, as Nazi Germany did in the WW 2 years, tweeted Mr. Zelensky. Russia has embarked on a path of evil, but Ukraine is defending itself and won't give up its freedom no matter what Moscow thinks. Loading. ABC or Wires.